Hello everyone, and welcome to the third part of our series, The Crisis of the West. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the causes of the crisis. Because if we don't understand what's causing the crisis, we will have a hard time figuring out solutions, right? In order to make anything better, you first have to understand what is the problem, what is causing it. Otherwise, you're only treating the symptoms, right? You're never really fixing the issue at hand. So, this is also going to be a little bit theoretical, so bear with me. It's not going to hurt that much, promise. What we're looking at and what is the main cause of the crisis of the West is what Jürgen Habermas in the early Habermas, when he was still wild and raucous, what he called the colonization of the life world. Right? So the life world is basically indicated here by this circle, and it consists of sort of the taken for granted ideas and beliefs and convictions and that we all share about the world. The life world is significant because it makes communication possible. It makes it possible for us to live together. And for society, it is the basis for, importantly, social integration. So it keeps society together. For socialization, which is sort of the process in which we introduce young new members, aka kids, into society, they learn the norms and values of society. And for social solidarity, right? So that we're all take care of one another, don't let those in need sit out in the cold, right? So those things depend on a working sort of life world, right? A healthy life world. And the life world is sustained and reproduced by communication. So when we talk to one another, we're constantly reproducing those taken for granted ideas that work in the background. They're kind of like our operating system, right? So communication is absolutely, or communicative action as Habermas called it, is absolutely crucial for this to work and for a healthy society, right? But there's some things that are not, where communication is kind of not the best option. When we live in a society of more than, let's say, 300-500 people, like in ancient Greece, for example, in the city-states, but we live in a large-scale modern society of millions of people, you cannot solve everything through one-on-one communication. Right? In a village, when I have harvested some grain and I need some milk for my cereal, then I go to someone else and be like, hey, I give you some grain, you give me some milk, we both are happy. That works, right? But not in a society that consists of millions of people. And this is where these two parts come in, right? The state, the government, and the market, our economy. So it's much easier actually to get milk in a properly working economy on a daily basis, or it's much easier to have a state that regulates sort of how that milk is produced than with pure communication. Okay, so we kind of need the economy and we need our government, and they need each other. Right? The market needs some rules that are enforced by the state. So property rights, right? If you work hard for something, then you want to own it and you don't want the next guy to come and take it from you. The government makes sure that's the case, right? The government and the state, on the other hand, does need revenue. It needs money to operate. So it needs a working economy. So those two are kind of dependent on one another. They provide a lot of function for a modern society that are very important, but they also, there's kind of what I call a dark side to the whole process. Because in doing so, the market and the state, they start to take over more and more functions in society, right? They kind of overlap here. So as my favorite example is for taking care of the elderly. In good old times, that used to be done by families. People would take care of their parents and grandparents until they would pass away. Now, in a society, in a modern, large-scale society like today, this is very difficult for a lot of people, especially when both partners in, let's say, a marriage are working. Right? Then they don't have the time to take care of the kids and of the elderly. So we have homes for senior citizens, and then the market, the economy takes care of the elderly, and that's regulated by the state. Education is another example, right? Kids go to school. If they go to Harvard, then it's the economy. And the rules according to which Harvard can operate are set by the government. So over time, state and market have taken over more and more functions. And this is what Habermas calls the colonization of the life world, right? They intrude in our lives more and more, like the colonizers, right? They went to another country, let's say to some states or some regions of Africa. They like put up camp there and they extracted all the resources, right? And this is basically what market and state are doing with the life world. Less and less, fewer and fewer things are done via communication. More and more things are done with by the market and by the state. Actually, the most extreme example that I can sort of think of is nowadays is friendships, right? Social media. We used to just hang out with kids on the street and play or be bored, actually. And that was done on a purely communicative basis, one-on-one, face-to-face. Nowadays, we go online, we log on to a platform that is run by a big, large company that promises us that we're going to find friends on their platform. And because a lot of people have acted really badly on those platforms, there's rules and laws enforced by the state trying to regulate that. But what we see in the example of social media is that those two are really bad in many cases at substituting communication, right? No Facebook, sorry, Mark. No Instagram, sorry again, Mark, is gonna replace hanging out with your kids on the street. And this is kind of the very simple example of the next step. The very crucial part, the more and more market and state are taking over functions of our lives, colonizing our life world, the less those things like social integration and socialization and solidarity are working. Because only communication can reproduce that. Market and state cannot do that. Money can't do that. Power can't do that. Only people can do that. And this is where you see the connection to our previous episode, where we showed that society is kind of falling apart, right? Because it's lacking solidarity, because social integration is lacking. There's a big rift, I would say, between the generations nowadays. It's maybe not what is all made up to be in some cases, but it's definitely an issue nowadays. How do we introduce young people into society without them being completely turned off, right? The problem is Instagram is not going to do that. Facebook's not going to do that. TikTok's not going to do that. The only way we're going to do that is through communication. So putting your kids just in front of a screen or providing education just on the basis of putting kids in front of screens is not going to work, right? This is the important insight you get from this analysis. You need teachers to teach kids. You need human beings to take care of the elderly, because this is the only thing that can sort of reproduce this. Okay? So this is the deep, deep cause of all the problems. This explains why the crisis of the West is not just a crisis of democracy in the United States, but also in Germany, in France, in the UK, in all Western countries, right, including Japan. And it explains why the problem is not just Donald Trump. Donald Trump might be a problem in many ways, but as we've seen with Joe Biden, nothing really changed, right? You have a red president, a Republican president. Things are bad. They should then get better, but they didn't. It just stayed the same. That's because this process is continuing. It doesn't matter which president, which chancellor, which party, and all the promises from some parties like the AfD that things are going to get much better when they're in power are also going to be false. They're not going to become a reality, because this is the problem, and this is not something that you can fix with an election or with a protest march or anything like that. So one important thing, or one important question, this is kind of like, the visual representation of a very, very long and very complicated argument by Jürgen Habermas in his 2-volume Theory of Communicative Action. But what he didn't answer is, why have things gotten so bad so quickly? Right? This process has been taking place for a long, long time, and this is now the second sort of image here you see on the bottom. This is the colonization of the life world over time, right? This is what is happening. This is the process over time. So it's been going on since, I would say, the Industrial Revolution, before then even, but it's been progressing at a rather slow speed, right? And this is why people sort of got along with it, could adapt maybe better than before. But then we moved to the 18th, 19th century, to the 2000s, and here it ticks up radically. It increases exponentially. And, well, we're not being so super exact here, but this is supposed to be the 80s, right? 1980s. And what was invented in the 1980s? The computer, right? The computer, and then came the internet, and then came the smartphone, and now comes AI. So there's an important point here. The problem is not simply technology, right? Technology itself isn't the problem at all. It's how technology is being used. And what's happening here is technology is basically functioning as a force multiplier. It is exponentially speeding up this process, right? We had the example of Instagram and Facebook already. The state during COVID, right, used the cell phones massively, required citizens to sort of identify themselves with apps and show their medical records and so on. So the state and the market, they're using these technologies in order to colonize our life world. And they colonize the living out of it, right? This technology has given them massive powers to speed this process up. And this is a real problem, right? Again, this doesn't mean technology is inherently bad. We use technology a lot. You're watching this on YouTube, right? So technology itself is not the problem. It's how it's being used. And we need to understand that there's a good side and a bad side to all of these things. Just like there's a good side to market, our economy, and to governments, right? Okay, so this is basically the very short explanation of what is causing the crisis of the West. And now we're coming towards our or approaching our last episode of the series, and that's going to be smooth sailing and downhill from here. In the last episode, we're going to talk about simple solutions.